Okay, so welcome everyone on behalf of the ACRS Victorian chapter. Chris Harrison, the lovely Chris Harrison, who you can see now, is our chair and I'm the deputy chair. And I will be doing introductions and Chris will be monitoring the Q&A and doing closing comments at the end of today's session. First of all, I'd like to do acknowledgement of country. So I'm sorry, I'm just reading the official ACRS version. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the many First Nations of Australia who continue to be the sovereign custodians of their countries and the sovereignty of the Maori in New Zealand. We acknowledge the ongoing traditional custodians of the lands on which we live, work, learn, and pay our respects to elders who have passed on the legacy of knowledge and culture to future generations. May this sharing of knowledge through Maturanga Maori and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being and doing guide you with wisdom and courage as it enhances our collective futures. So today we will have three speakers. Our first speaker will be Jerome Carslake, and I will give you a little bio of Jerome. We'll then hear from Keith Govias and Nicki Wragg. So our first speaker today is Jerome Carslake, who most of you will know very well. He's the director of the National Road Safety Partnership Program, which is delivered by the Monash University Accident Research Centre, that we all know as MUARC. Jerome has extensive knowledge in workplace road safety management, program delivery, and the collaborative development of solutions. Jerome is the chair of the Construction Logistics and Community Safety Australia, CLOCS A, steering group, which adapting world's best practice transport for London's CLOCS program to Australia. Jerome's origins are from the northern wheat belt of Western Australia, from a large broadacre farm, and his passion is in teamwork and collaboration, which originate from his rowing at an elite level in Perth as both a rower and coach. Jerome holds a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and a Master's in Agribusiness and an industry adjunct at Swinburne University. So please welcome Jerome.
Awesome, thank you for that. I probably could tighten that up a lot more. That's
That's
right.
okay.
What I'm going to do is just a bit of a scene set because I've been sort of invited to come in to kick off the fireside chat, and I was privileged to have Keith and Nicki join me, sort of building on it. What I want to start off is actually really acknowledge that this month is National Safe Work Month. And I'll touch on that a little bit in a tick. But I'd also just like to reflect, like 2 weeks ago, the major ACRS 2024 took place in Hobart with the theme Target 2030. What's the pathway forward? And what I'd like to think about that is how many corporates were actually in attendance at the conference. And when you sort of reflect on it, there's only a few that was really there, and it's sort of quite a missed opportunity. But also reflect from our own side, from I guess our learned road safety colleagues, in reflecting on that. There's one utility provider that was there from the electricity sector, was challenged quite a few times by road safety there, and sort of questioning, well, why are you here? What's the purpose? How does road safety relate to your organisation? And when he went back to them, they were quite stunned when he said, look, my organisation travels 65 million kilometres per annum. It's our number one risk. It's what kills our workers, not electricity. It's the journey to and from and travelling around. And this is sort of compound. So the vehicle as a workplace is a key and major risk to a lot of organisations, but businesses can move a lot quicker in addressing the issues. But the question I'll sort of pose, and I sort of drew on this quite a bit when I was at the conference, is the question around, do people and workers really only care when they're sort of being watched? So with the target theme of 2030, are we really leveraging the vehicles at workplace to maximise their impact? And are we really thinking about what this means to the general sort of public and what that sort of means moving forward? So as I mentioned, it's National Safe Work Month. So this is sort of the latest stats that have come out from Safe Work Australia, current as of 2020, released September. And what I want to touch on this is, as you can see, vehicle incidents remain the greatest cause of fatals. And it's also one of the major contributors of injuries as well. This is actually pulled down. It used to be 2/3, but now it's down to 42%. Particularly, it's usually around half is taking place on public roads and half on private. But you can sort of go through there. And one of the things I want you to think about is the research is very clear in this. A lot of people think they're above average driver. So it's sort of the drivers are poorly calibrated. And the complexity an organisation has is they have a duty of care to provide a safe workplace for their workers. So how do you do that when everyone thinks they're fantastic at what they do because they haven't had a speeding fine, haven't had a crash, those sort of things. So they feel pretty good about themselves. But from an organisational point of view, a lot of the directors and C-SPAN people at the top, they sort of identify the heavy vehicles as their major risk. And I'll pose this as some of the organisations I speak to, is that because it's better regulated? You have a national heavy vehicle regulator that come down, they know what to look for, and there's people that travel all around the place. Does the same thing take place for the light vehicle regulator? Is the same approach given over to those who go through the factory floor to look into the offices, those sort of components? Do they walk past the vehicles, which are probably the number one cause and contributing to vehicle incidents when they're going in to see what's going on in the workplace? And one of the main things that sort of happens that's quite common is it stops at the office door or the factory floor. Once the vehicles are out of sight, out of mind. And it's quite a common culture. A recent toolbox talk we did really pointed to that because one organisation put their ASX report in, declaring 238 days without an incident. And one of our partners sort of was in there to deal with them because they had a crash 20 days ago, a serious one, and the C-SPAN did not even know. And they actually went to the ASX and reported that things were all fine. So the question is also, does safety culture only really exist when it's being checked and monitored? So if Big Brother or people I'm watching over there, have we got a culture here? And this is quite particular within the workplace, whereby if people are only watching them, is that when they sort of really care? And I'll give an example of several organisations where they say they've got a really, really strong and powerful culture. And they do, they can show it. They got the evidence that they sit there, they drive well, all that sort of safety elements. But then when they finish their work, they go out and they can hear them blast off, doing burnouts out of their car parks, doing all these sort of things. And the leaders are like, well, are we going to see some of these people come back on the weekends after they've had their weekend off? So the question is, how much is that sort of safety culture actually inbred into them? I was given the counter one on that as well. A friend of mine who worked at Shell, and those sort of ones, these are organisations have life-saving goals. It's bred into them, and it goes wherever they are. So even since this fellow left about a decade ago from Shell, he's still very mindful about how people climb ladders and all those sort of components. It's part of his breed. It's bred into him. So this is the key thing: is what happens when people are off the clock. What I really want to touch on in this last little bit, just in sort of scene setting, and if you look at this, this is some work, and we have a deep webinar that sort of delves into this by Isla. And we can see here, and what I sort of touch on, is if we can create a sort of flourishing worker, if we can sort of create people sort of get life satisfaction. And what that means is, are they engaged? Is there meaning? Is there pleasure in their lives? And so you reflect back to probably some of our higher risk sort of people out on the road. Some of them may want a higher level of pleasure. They want to blast on, they want to fuel the vehicle, they want to really go through it, push the envelopes. It's more important for me getting around. But are they really meaning engaged in life? So when you go through and you think about what an organisation can do, you think about the point of view of how you drive is how you work, which is how you live. So when you go in, you don't just sort of go to work and you live at home, you bring the two together. So from an organisational point of view, have you got the right sort of, is the worker stimulated? Do they feel pressure? Do they feel engaged? What are the sort of questions in the culture that's sort of going through and breeding into them? What sort of really workplace are you designing for these sort of workers that's getting them stimulated and loving what they're sort of doing, and they're feeling like they're contributing to basically their lifestyle, to society, and they've got meaning in their life as they're moving forward. And I know Keith is really going to be great in sort of drawing on this as next sort of step. But the other part I want to think about is, if you're sitting there going, do people get their license because we just tick the box? How do we make sure they actually have the competency to be behind the wheel, which goes right back to the whole point of, I've forgotten what the point was now, but the whole point of meaning, and do they have the skills? And I guess the duty of care, that was the key point. Do they have a duty of care, and do they understand why the workplace cares and wants them coming back to and from work? So that's just a bit of a scene set for some thoughts. Over to you, Chris, or Catherine.
Terrific. Sorry, I had muted myself. Thanks, Jerome. That's actually really insightful, and it makes a whole lot of sense too. Because we don't have a Jekyll and Hyde persona, or we shouldn't, should we? That's great. We're going to do all the questions at the end. So right now I'll introduce our next speaker. who is Keith Govias from EML. He's a workplace health and safety manager from EML, and he brings a wealth of experience from over 12 years of managing safety, worker compensation, and public liability for some of Australia's most iconic brands, including Myer, The Reject Shop, and Kraft Foods. Most recently, he spent over 4 years with Gallagher, a leading global insurance broker, providing support to businesses across Australia. Australia in a number of key sectors, including oil, gas, agriculture, manufacturing. Keith sits on a number of regulatory reference panels advising on mental health and work health safety policy and legislative change, and is a retired chair of the Australian Retail Association Work Well Mental Health Project and the Health Benefits of Good Work Signatory Steering Group. So go ahead, Keith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And thank you, everyone, today. I think in taking on where Jerome's left off, for me, today's conversation is really about the social impact of safety culture and risk-taking behaviour programs that a lot of businesses are investing more and more time in today, as well as the focus of how we design work where we know that there may be impacts where it flows on into individuals' lives, and also about the way that we communicate our intent with safety and safe behaviour programs. This goes back to Jerome's concept of clock on, clock off. The type of behaviour that we're after with people behind the wheel shouldn't be started when they clock on for a shift and then our responsibility ends when they clock off. We want them to be demonstrating that behaviour, those safe choices at all times. So I think when I think about it from an employer perspective, my feedback to the audience today is a lot of employers struggle with the concept or the construct of how much do we need to play a part in influencing our workers' lives? At what point do we say our responsibility ends and they're adults? They should be taking on responsibility for themselves. They need to have a driver's license. They do that independently before they're working for us. It's one of their obligations as a citizen. Well, I also reflect on the fact that for most businesses operating in our communities today, there's a social contract. The social contract enables the business, the employer, to actively work and to operate in the community, but there's an intent that what we do will cause no harm, that the work that we have will produce no ill effects on members of the community. And sometimes this can be in the way that we impact on our workers. So there is a positive intent for every employer to keep their workers safe, but then we should also have this ability or positive intent to ensure that our work doesn't impact on workers when they're leaving. And this leads me to possibly trying to tie it into the new mental health legislation that's coming through in all of the jurisdictions we have around Australia. A lot of the mental health focus from regulators across Australia is really to try and put some emphasis back on employers to better understand their mental health risks, to make sure that mental health hazards are identified and that they're controlled actively. Now, what we're seeing out of regulators is this recognition that mental health is on a continuum, that someone may have mental ill health from outside of work and bring it into work, and that could be further exacerbated by their work conditions, or conversely, someone might actually be in a really good mental state before they come into work, but the conditions of work, the type of risks that are related to the activity that they're undertaking, can have a negative influence on them once they leave. So for those that are employers on this call, I think what we need to think about is this concept of liability. If we think that our liability is now becoming grey because the mental health risk that we have that goes down onto a worker could result in them making poor choices once they've finished work, then there is a potential link in to our obligations. And it should be a business case for employers wanting to play a more proactive role in actually getting their workers to act more safely, especially when they're behind a vehicle wheel outside of work hours. So I think we need to start focusing on this concept of removing the idea that rules are there for when you're at work, that there are rules that govern all of the safety aspects of your behaviour. There's a new concept coming through in terms of safety thought and leadership, which is about trying to teach people how to understand risk and assess risk better, and to live their lives in good risk-taking behaviour. And I think this is possibly where we need to be going with this conversation, is delivering risk management programs for drivers which focuses on their choices, whether it comes to travel and fatigue management, the choice to speed, the choice to engage in unsafe behaviours. Jerome talked to his last slide about thriving workers and the interrelationship between workers that thrive and their driver violations. I think that most workplaces are looking for positive mental states for their workers. They want to have thriving workers, and workers that feel engaged and safe in the workplace are also probably more likely to talk to their managers about conditions outside of work that may impact on them. So if, for example, I need to drive straight after I finish work on a Thursday for a long weekend, and it's going to be a 6-hour drive, if I felt safe at work, that might be something where I would actually like to talk to my manager beforehand about flexible work arrangement that could help me to make better decisions about how I drive on the road. So that concept of a thriving worker and a thriving workplace provides safety. And I think this is where I come back to, it might be scary for employers to think about this boundary where responsibility starts and stops. But really, it's about the type of culture that we want to enact. It's about the type of work that we want to design. It's about how we want to communicate that. And I really look forward to hearing Nicki actually talk to this, because I think that she'll be able to provide us some guidance on appropriate concepts and solutions that may benefit us all. So, Catherine, I might hand back to you at this point.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Keith. That's really insightful again. So we're very lucky to have such impactful and knowledgeable speakers. So our next speaker is Nicki Wragg, Professor Nicki Wragg. She is the Interim Dean at the School of Business Law and Entrepreneurship at Swinburne University. She has a communication design background and applies a design lens to curriculum development, research, engagement and leadership. She is an avid supporter of industry-engaged education and connects students, staff and industry in meaningful and collaborative projects. Her research interests include communication design, technology and design education, where she uses design processes in multifaceted ways. As a research tool to understand people, a method to create change and design outcomes that shift behaviour. So thank you very much, Nicki.
Thanks very much, Catherine, and thanks, Jerome and Keith, for beginning the conversation. It's always funny when communication design comes into the mix, because a lot of people will think about communication design as being graphic design and think we just create pretty pictures. And we do, but it's also, it's much more than that, because it's quite an intellectual and technical activity and creative activity, which is really about cutting through a lot of complex information. And Jerome and my relationship go back to 2016, where we've been working in the space of road safety and using communication design in a variety of ways to really sort of shift behaviour, but also creating awareness of certain situations on the road and creating different types of awareness around different road users. So I'm sort of going to talk today really on two fronts. You know, there's an aspect that I feel quite strongly about in terms of the workforce, that, you know, every workforce has a responsibility to ensure their workers are safe, both, you know, when they're leaving work as well as at work. You know, the responsibility just never shifts. And I think one of those things that, you know, within a university context, we really try very hard not to ensure that staff are teaching, 9 hours without a break, which, some staff like to do because they get it all out in one day. But the reason for that is purely, well, what happens when you go home to and from work? You're not in that space to be able to cope with, good decision making. Similarly, with students, when they've got so many exams or end of year submissions that they have to hand in, that really impacts on their ability to and from the university to be able to submit successfully. So, one of those things that we do around the university is really develop, internal communications, which just say, just be careful, mind what you're doing. And I think that's something that, we see in various companies doing it, but it really is an internal language and a visual language, which I think each workforce really has to have a responsibility. And it's not just about setting up a whole stack of sort of posters on the walls with odd typefaces and things like that. It's about establishing a look and a feel for awareness throughout the offices. And it might be posters, it might be texts, it might be banners, all sorts of things, videos, but it's really about having the same tone, whether it's textual, visual, typographic, going throughout. So they're just ongoing and regular nudges which just remind people what it is that they need to be doing, what it is that they need to be mindful on the roads, both during work hours and off work hours, because your off work hours is going to impact your on work hours if you're not behaving or driving safely. Some of the research that we've conducted has been in the 18 to 25-year-old age group, because they're quite a high risk category on the roads. And one thing which I think, is quite universal across the board, but really became quite apparent to them, was that they want information in the moment that they can apply straight away. We're all used to the big universal sort of TAC ads, which have been happening since the 1980s, and, they're fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And people remember them, but does that memory actually convert into behaviour change and understanding what to do and what can be actioned in a particular situation? And so there's a need for both types of communications. Always. And these can be quite local, like, watch out for the ditch on such and such a road. So if you've got quite a regional space, these sorts of nudges can be quite sort of very close to where the workers are, what they're doing, all of those sorts of things. I'm calling them workers, it's just easier. But I think, and they need to be ongoing and updated regularly, because they need to have relevancy and recency. And it's not something that we can ever stop doing, because the road conditions change and laws change. And I think it's really important that everybody needs to know that. And so, with the 18 to 25-year-old group, this is the other way that, that there's one way where you're using design to promote a visual language, to be able to cut through a lot of clutter and be able to get that message through. There's also another way that we use it, which is really about developing sort of design tools, such as posters, such as prototypes, to test to see what people's attitudes are towards the road and things like that. So some of the things we found, which was really interesting, was that, Australians don't like humour. They might remember, they like it in that road safety messages, if they're humorous, they're memorable, but they don't necessarily motivate behaviour change. And they don't necessarily go, oh, yes, that's going to change my actions. They do see, and this is this 18 to 25-year-old group, they do see it, very much the kind of fear or shock. While we think that we always tested whether, that works or not, and we don't like to see the TAC ads, but they like to see a cause and effect going on. If this happens, I'll get fined by the police, or if this happens, it might be that I have a crash and I'm quite injured. And so that seems to be a way of communicating visually, but at the same time, they want to know what to do and what are the in the moment things that you can apply in that space. So don't do this, it could cause that, but slow down now, or slow down in different areas. So we have used quite a bit of deliberate sort of poster work, campaign work, different types of photography or drawings to see, illustration to see what relates and what people are prepared to listen to or take notice of. And photography was the main sort of catch cry that everybody said, well, I see photography because that narrative relates to me. And I think it's a really interesting thing when we think about the road, because we always think about the universal road users, but we never think about the backgrounds that those people bring to the road. And so part of our research, we really saw that, there are a lot of international students within that age group. And so they bring a whole other sort of knowledge, experience, background of driving in different countries onto the Australian roads. And so, it's become such a complex mix of attitudes, expectations, and ways of doing things in the space. So I think there's a real opportunity for workplaces to be incredibly good citizens and try and lead the way, or even get together as a collective and design a universal set of nudges, communications, ways of dealing with road use so people are safe both on the road when they're at work, but also in their usual lives. I think that's all I have to say.
Oh, thanks, Nicki. Well, I'm sure we'll have some questions. So I'm going to hand it over now to Chris, and she's going to facilitate the Q&A.
Thank you, Nicki. Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Jerome. As you know from our run through yesterday, I had lots of comments and questions, so I'm going to hold them back. But I would like to kind of bring to the attention what's been coming up in the chat. And Sean, you had a first comment. Are you there? Would you like to speak to that so that we can kind of bring that up?
Sure.
Yeah.
Briefly, look, some of you know I've worked in the work health and safety space for about 20 years. And historically, this has been the case that for workplaces, because so in Victoria, road crashes are covered by the TAC's no-fault scheme, or in Tasmania, the MIB, different schemes in different states. And historically, health and safety or HR areas haven't seen even work-related road crashes as a big issue they've had to deal with, because the costs of it don't come out of their work cover premium, it comes out of the TAC.
Yep.
So it's changed a bit in recent years, but historian. So, again, there's a mixture also of the non-work related incidents and the impact on the workplace. But again, even those road crashes and even very serious incidents happening in work time, work vehicles, the cost of that's not coming out of the work cover costs. And so HR and health and safety people traditionally have not seen this as a cost to them.
If I could just comment to that, Sean, I think that's an excellent point. One of the things that I've seen in my time is that workers actually get treated differently sometimes if they're on a TAC claim as opposed to a workers' compensation claim. So workers' compensation automatically switches on the love component in a manager. They love you, they're interested in you, they want to know how they can support you in being at work. And sometimes if your non-work related injury is there, sometimes including TAC where you do get subsidies or otherwise, I've often heard examples of where you talk about you hear managers talking about de-risking. I'm going to de-risk this for the business. Don't come back till you're fully fit. And that can be quite harmful, not only to the worker and their community around them, but also to the broader culture in the workplace. So I think this concept of positive culture requires our employers to take a more holistic view of the world. So I think a great point.
I'd also like to build on that, because I think you're exactly right. You can hide a lot of numbers, but as also made the point, how often does a WorkSafe regulator actually ever look at the vehicles, check the tyres, see what systems are in place? Because you could easily, I think it'd be an easy measure to say from our work covers or WorkSafe, and actually been asking them how many workplaces are they checking. But one of the things that sort of get hidden a little bit in the stats are probably near misses. And a lot of heavy vehicle operators, for example, experience a lot of near misses events. And a lot of them now, sometimes I've been talking to expressing how the roads are probably the worst I've ever seen them. And some of them are spending an hour, hour and a half at the end of every day just sort of decompressing when they get home, which is impacting on their family life, which sort of shows you can't just park it and then shift off, but they're out there every day trying to keep everyone else safe. And that's also having a major impact. And another data information sort of picks up those sort of elements as well.
And Jerome, I think I mentioned this to you, but I've been working with a workplace, and a female worker was killed. She was spotting a truck. She was in a ute, and she'd got out to spot a truck. I don't know what that meant exactly, but she forgot to put the handbrake on and saw it rolling down the road, went after it and got run over and was killed. And when you think about the stats, that actually didn't workplace, it didn't fit with workplace, even though it was a workplace vehicle, and it went through TAC for compensation. So, it's a bit all over the place, whereas I would have felt that would have been a workplace injury.
Even just pulling that thread a little bit more, if it's a suicide in the road system as well, we did a project around suicide and road transport prevention. And once again, drawing on what Nicki spoke about, I guess the design of communications is crucial in that. So you sort of avoid the effect of having others sort of copycatting it, and the weather effect is known as. But if someone does that in the road system, if there's a suicide that takes place, it's removed from our data. So it's probably another 7.5% at least. But if it's deemed as a suicide, it's not reported.
All right, we'll move on to David, who has got a comment in here. David, would you like to speak to this? Your first one, you've got a couple, but around the research.
Yeah. I was just thinking in regards to how, like, you drive behind a car, it has a sign, call this number to report any poor driver behaviour. And I just sort of wondering whether that had actually made any difference to an employer's driving behaviour by their employees, because I know I've done work out at the mines where it's very restricted out in when you're talking about the regional areas where they've got GPS locating on their vehicles. They've got it's rigged so it tells them if they've got their seatbelt on, and they'll have 3 strikes. And if they're driving along and they're exceeding the speed limit, they know straight away. And then when they get back, excuse me, we need to have a chat. And the 3 of them, and they've lost their job. So whilst it does control their behaviour, as Keith was also saying, how does that affect their mental health, always having that pressure there? But yeah, in regards to that driver behaviour, I was just thinking, do they actually drive better if they know that it's easily reported if I do something stupid?
Keith, Nicki, Jerome, have you got some comments to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the crucial thing with any of those technologies is you've got to always remember they're just a tool. And it comes down to, well, what's the consequence framework? What's all the other supporting elements that sit around it? And like a good organisation, like I was sort of saying then, it's not meant to be Big Brother. It's not meant to be sitting over. It's helping them cover off on the duty of care. And as long as they know you give them permission to pull over and stop to do, these are the sort of systems in there. Like there's one corporate, for example, has a principle: if you go on gravel roads, you go down to 80 k's an hour. And it says someone comes up and they're flying along, pull over, give them space. And they say that you can pull over, have a break, this sort of stuff. Use these opportunities to go through. So I think it's all about making sure the conversation is sitting there. Because I do know on the contrary that where organisations have put the technology in with nothing sitting around it, and someone's then explored it, and you can see the behaviour is insane. It's 150 breaches because no one checks on it, no one cares about it. It might have been put in for a contract to tick a box and this sort of stuff. So it's the same thing, and it goes back to the point. Do people understand the why? So if you're going back to that, how's that built in? Because if you're sitting there just saying thou shalt do it, you need to get people to buy into being safe at all the time. It's part of the design and what they're sort of living and breathing. Let's ask Keith about what's like mowing lawns.
I think I used the example in some of our discussions, David, of the fact that quite often when people are changing light bulbs or doing things in the workplace, they have safe work method statements, there's a SOP, there's PPE, there's a real focus on safety, maybe even two people doing the job. But the moment you come back and need to change the light bulb at home, you go pick up a dining chair and you're standing on it because you just want to get it done as quickly as possible. Or if you're mowing a lawn, no one's wearing hearing protection and safety boots. Most likely they're in a pair of thongs. They're trying to get it done as quickly as possible so they can get back to the footy or otherwise. In terms of your particular question, I don't know if there's a study or if there's any academic research on businesses that have a telephone number and they're used to police their workforce internally. But I would think that any business that's gone to the effort of printing it on every vehicle they have and having a number that is potentially manned should have some very good governance structure. The question is whether those details are escalated as part of their management reporting and monthly reporting up. So I think there might be a PhD in there somewhere if you want to touch base to Jerome later on.
I do know several corporates that have it and they act on it, and it's part of their reporting processes and everything. So that's the kind of thing. As long as it's like near misses, like everything. If you're catching it and acting on it, it will have an impact. Otherwise, if nothing's occurring from it, once again, they don't know the why people aren't doing it, and they'll push the limits.
Yep.
Just be careful because it becomes also a bit of a distraction too. If you're seeing a number that you want to, get to and call, it can be a distraction on the road.
Yeah, and if they've gone to that effort, it's probably so that they've got it in their workplace to say this is a mitigation tool to reduce poor driver behaviour.
Yeah, and I think as Jerome had wrote in that second slide that he put in, that it was on the life satisfaction that those that had that flourishing life had fewer road violations, which I was really interested to see when you put that to me. And I guess I often think, are we becoming too reliant on the rules and, all the signs and being enforced and some of the systems that are being put in place? Are we as drivers becoming too reliant on that?
I think
interested to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, look, I think, Chris, what strikes me as a measure personally of how thriving I am is when I come to the end of my street and there's a stop sign there, and if I actually make the effort to stop the car for 3 seconds before I turn into the next street up versus I'm coasting along and slowing up and I'm looking to check whether there's a car coming, and then I use my momentum and keep swinging around, because otherwise that tells me I'm feeling like there's pressure to get somewhere. I'm feeling like it's not worthwhile to stop at that point. Now, the rule is I have to stop, but I'm making a decision every day at just the junction at the end of my street about whether that's an important rule to follow or not. So sometimes I think that, again, that measure of thriving, where you are sitting in terms of your resilience and your value of time. The fact is that I value the 3 seconds I spend there because it could be the difference in saving my life or saving someone else's life and then taking off, versus I value the perceived time that I'm saving, which is why I speed, which is why I cut in front of the truck, because I want to get somewhere fast, when it doesn't necessarily translate that way. So I guess that just my 2 cents.
And I think, Keith, that's really interesting. I think we spoke about this previously too. It's very much the difference between, an individual approach to the world and the community, or a collective approach to community, where I drive in a way that I'm going to keep myself and everybody around me safe, or I drive because I need to get somewhere and nobody else matters. And I think that's a really interesting space, because it becomes such a philosophical question of how we live and how we interact with our communities, regardless of whether it's a work community or a home community. And I mean, let's face it, so many of us spend so much more time at work than what we do at home, that there's an argument there that, that there's no real clocking off, because you are at work more than you're at home. So, just extend it out into that space. But I think that's absolutely, and I think we need to, really start thinking about not just having one good citizen, but a community of good citizens. And where does that start and where does it stop?
Mm.
Thanks, Nicki. Kathy, you've put a question about policies.
Yeah, so my question was, statistically, what policies do we know make change, like have a significant impact on the data? So is there a company that has the gold standard policies that have reduced their statistics in terms of road trauma?
Yeah, I'd say so. There's certainly ways, and I put some comment. There's multiple ways of doing it, because once again, we always talk around a system and how you go through. So it shouldn't just be all about dropping everything on the driver. Because like what Keith was pointing out, maybe there's ways of designing and elements. And I know, like, for example, talking with one of the massive retailers just yesterday in a group, there's ways that you can change jobs, reduce pressures when you begin thinking about from a risk-based approach, and you can begin. But it's about, once again, bringing the workers on board, because you can't create build Rome in a day, and you've got to take people on a journey and look at it systematically and plan it all out and try and say, well, how can I resource this as well, instead of trying to do it. But some of the low-hanging sort of fruit in there, that's what I sort of put in there. You think back to when BHP Bilderson brought in the 5-state NCAP policy globally. It's like a first of its kind, and the disruption that had across OEMs and all those sort of components, and all of a sudden they brought them in. So you can easily put things into contracts, which is a powerful way of doing it. Once again, you got to define the contract correctly, because the mention is, you can say you have to have telematics in your contract. Well, that's great. I'll put them in my vehicle, but then you haven't said you have to have telematics in the vehicle and measure safe and report on safe driving behaviour. Because I know companies have put it in, and then they say, well, what are you going to tell us how you're going? They're like, nah, it's not on the contract. So this is around the crucial thing on defining and getting those elements right. The Clocks A one's a great example with the major infrastructure projects. It's been drawing on what was done over in the UK. So there's those parts that sit around the contracts, there's the vehicles, but I think going into the drivers and really bringing them in. If someone's driving for work every day, say you're out on the road 8, 10, 12, 15 hours a day, when you say it's only fair to have a performance measure against that, are you sure they have a driver's license, for example? Are they driving a safe vehicle? How do you know? What are those sort of basics that are going through those areas? For journey planning, working on that and making sure the checks, have they got a journey management plan? Are they squeezing too many things into the task? Fatigue, and I'll even draw on one around when you begin understanding the risk sort of approach. A lot of people think fatigue is, I'm tired. There's also multiple forms of fatigue and how that sort of feeds into other elements like distraction, aggression, but even there's emotional fatigue. We feel pressured and elements like that, or and it's sort of empowering the worker to sort of understand themselves quite a bit. So I think there's how you sort of design it. There's no silver bullet. You talk to a C-SPAN, they want a silver bullet. Jerome, what is it? What can I do? And you go, well, sorry, there's not. But I think it's around the system and a conversation.
Yeah, and I think we all know the changes to our driving that happen when we're under extreme time pressures or scheduling pressures. You're in a hurry, you're stressed, your whole mindset changes when you're driving. You get every red light. You don't, but you think you do because you're in a hurry. So if workers have that extreme pressure on their schedules, that would definitely have an impact on the way they're driving.
There's also perceived pressure. Like,
Yeah.
I want to get home, but you go, well, we want to get home in one piece, so why don't you stay over the night? Or
Yeah.
say you're a diver, drive in, drive out, or some of those other sort of people, or you're working in security. What about when you finish your shift, there's like a 30-minute or something like a power nap or something like that, just to prep you to make sure you get home. So
Yeah.
it's and a lot of the workers have the perception, no, I've got to get home straight away. I can beat it, but it's once again, how do you engage them to say, well, these are the tools, because like some of them will give all these elements to try and allow that, but the worker just wants to get going.
Yeah.
And Catherine, I think what Jerome articulated there really well was the fact that you can have policies, but if you don't have the right culture for workers to want to bring those policies to life, or for the worker to feel safe enough to say, I don't think that I can work within our expectations, help me to manage this risk. Is it okay for me not to visit 4 clients today, can I only visit 3? Those are some of the powerful indicators of good culture. And I think, to some of the work that Nicki talked to, if you get your communication right, the emphasis on what is important and the value that we place on your safety actually gets seen, because you're getting people to visualize it and to get them to resonate with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's all very well for a company to say they have a safe driving culture, but if all of their policies contradict that in reality, then that's definitely unfair.
True.
And I think, looking at the workplace, thinking what our Work Safe Month and Mental Health Month, we're really we're taking ourselves into that driving experience. And many of us have got lots of things going on in our minds. And are we fit to drive, I guess, sometimes mentally, because of all that stuff that is going on when we look at, that fatigue and loss of concentration out there on the road.
Yeah, shift workers, rotating shift workers. We've all seen examples of that, and how it impacts road trauma terribly, particularly in the health sector.
And even and I think that's a really interesting point, the health sector as well could be, so you begin looking at, if you understand your people, so maybe like in the health in particular, not-for-profit, some of them, they can be very altruistic. They want to give more, and they'll go above and beyond to the detriment of themselves. So it's like, here's my shift. I can squeeze another one in. I can push another one. Next minute they're behind, and once now they're stretching, they're pushing to try and do more to give back. So their heart's in the right sort of place, but you've got to have that. But that's when the role of the management and it's the eyes on, the checking. You've got to go through and you've got to sort of pull them back and temper their enthusiasm and make the point going, well, we want you to give quality, not quantity, and empower them to understand. And we want you to keep doing it. So we don't want you to have a crash and so you can't do it.
And I think if I can just add to that, I think back through some of the experiences I've had operationally, and there are days that you have interactions with either your customers, your co-workers, where they're not what you expect. There's a degree of emotional trauma that comes out of interpersonal conflict. And that, at times, rather than fatigue, is what's playing on your mind when you're on the road. You're replaying those conversations. You're thinking about, I just wish I could have said, because I'm having a brainstorm of a moment, and everything that I would have wanted to respond back with, I'm hearing myself say now, but you're not concentrating on the road. You're not looking at the speed. You're not doing all of those things. You're not present.
Yeah.
So sometimes having an employer that's also prepared to say, when you're in that mindset, we want you to have a peer-to-peer culture where you debrief before you get out on the road, or if there's no one else around, choose to take an Uber or choose to take another form of transport that is safer for you than getting behind the wheel at the moment.
And that comes down to self-awareness and self-reflection on what you can do in that space. So some people do use their car for their business and those sorts of things, and they feel quite equipped, whereas others just no, they don't. So what are the things that you do? Do you turn off your phones when you're in the car? Do you make sure you're not even tempted to go there because you know you can't deal with multiple things at once?
Yeah.
Ken's put an interesting one in just now. Should we encourage staff to cycle to work knowing it's higher risk than driving?
I think so. I think that's also part of the conversation. I think encouraging people to ride to work, but you're at the same time you also got to encourage other workers to understand the value of cycling, and you've got to have a broader part and saying, look, this is the risk of doing it. This is your responsibility in keeping the other co-workers sort of safe where they're going in. Because as someone who used to cycle to work quite a lot, and I have heard stories, and I have experienced the risk that it can take, especially when you're moving through. But sometimes when your mind's distracted, other sort of components can pop up. But as long as there are all the resources to support and everything sitting there, I think it's a fantastic opportunity.
I think. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Ken, you go.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've pondered this one a lot because I very much encourage people to ride and the like. But we've got absolutely categorical evidence that is a more dangerous way to get to work. And I just don't think it would fly if it wasn't an on-road commute thing. If I had an activity I asked my workers to do, and I said, actually, I want you to do it this way, which is higher risk because it's got some other benefits. It just wouldn't fly if it was an actual work task.
And you go, Nicki.
Say something, Ken. I think that comes down to the sort of, the individual approach of drivers and people, and I'm more important than you on the road because I'm bigger, and all of those sort of, it's very complex, and breaking down opinions and changing perceptions about levels of importance and everybody's right to get to work safely, or your question is a really complex question.
Yeah, but I boil it down to like something simple. I mean, so we know of companies out there who do not let their workers ride to work or ride between meetings. They say no, that's a higher risk activity. So when you're going, I want to invest in shower facilities, change facilities, everything like that, but I'm doing that knowing that I'm putting my workers at more of a chance of being killed or seriously injured, I'm not comfortable doing that.
I totally understand. I mean, this is where you almost need to sit there and plan it out with them and get their skill, because the worst thing, it's like ride to work day is today, I believe, isn't it?
Yes,
or yesterday. Yeah.
But then there's also the other argument that if someone who is fit is happier generally in their lifestyle, they're more productive, they're less likely to get sick. So you've got two sides of every argument.
Yeah. Good. I know. Yeah. No, thanks for your input and great session.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think also, like, riding for a lot of Australia, that isn't even an option either, being able to ride to work. I guess a lot of the people I work in regional Victoria, and lots of land space in between on their journey as well. So,
and Chris, just one other thing on that as well, like with the whole rise of food delivery and all those sort of components. I know, once again, talking to the heavy vehicle sector, they see them out on the road and it just stresses the truck drivers because they go, I have no idea where these people are going to go in front of me. So there's all sorts of different groups of riding for work. But I think overall, it's probably, once again, I think it's a common problem I see in Australia. Like if in Sweden, when I was over there, I'd see a cycle lane, the cyclists are in 10 in a row, one behind the other, and there's two cars at the front. So it's a whole cultural difference over there. There's a lot more respect, and it's all about a shared responsibility, everyone working together. Whereas once again, come to Australia, it's very much individualistic, which is why I think Ken's concern is very valid.
I guess the good thing is if your co-workers are riding to work, it's a mental reminder when you see other riders on the road that could be Ken, that could be Chris, that could be. So maybe that helps to change behaviour towards cyclists.
okay. And I guess, coming back to culture, that's come up a lot in the discussion today. And, for me, I often think, wouldn't it be nice if people just do safety because it's what they think is the best thing to do, as opposed to all the policies and procedures and law enforcements and all those kind of things. So how do we shift that cultural thinking to put safety at the front of our mind every time that we're on the roads, regardless of how we're on the roads.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually in the midst of typing a question to Nicki when she was talking about photographs and the importance of photographs. I was thinking of a road safety campaign. So Jerome, you heard it here first. It starts off with this lovely landscape beside the road, and then underneath it, you see the same landscape, but with one of those road fatality crosses. And it was, the tagline is, enjoy the landscape whilst you're driving, don't become part of it. But I think that's the type of effort we want is, when we're thinking about safety, we need to get people to think about the why. Why is it important for them? What do they lose out on when they're making a choice? Because there's always this opportunity cost. And I think if we can start to communicate more effectively the why for the individual, that changes behaviour.
And I would even say going up to the top of the organisations, getting organisations to go into it. The reason corporates are doing it, not for profits, the reason they excel at it, the reason they're putting it in place is because it saves them money. So, to be brutally honest, it's good business. So they don't do it. I think that's a key thing a lot of people need to recognise.
But I think also, Jerome, too, it saves them money, but I think it's not just TAC's job to put out these ads every year. It's all of us to embrace it, because yourself, the attitudes are so complex around road users and the various road users, and it ranges from, I despise cyclists because they don't have to get a licence to use the road. I don't like them because they take up more space on the road than what a car does. And, it's
cyclists.
Very, very complex. And then cyclists don't like pedestrians because they're unpredictable. And so you just sort of, everybody is passing off this kind of attitude of they're a nuisance, and it's much bigger. It's a much bigger attitudinal shift that we need to deal with, and I think conversations like this is fantastic, because I think we need to, the encouragement has to come from corporates, and they really having to do this sort of thing. And we've got the breast cancer days, we've got Are You OK days, we've got all of these things that corporates are buying into. What happens if we just turn around and start saying, actually, road safety is just one of those big things that we really need to address now?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Nicki, for our final comment, because we have hit 1:01. So we need to finish up, but a really fantastic conversation. And I think, just on that last comment, Nicki, there are opportunities for us all to influence the changes that we're wanting to see on the roads, for that safety, as part of culture. So thank you, Jerome. Thank you, Nicki. Thank you, Keith. And thanks everyone for attending. It's been a really good conversation. And just to wrap up, I just want to say, our lunchbox chats are every 2 months. There won't be any more now till next year, obviously, but if you've got some thoughts or ideas for these conversations, just to open up on different topics, please do let us know. We will send you an evaluation link at the end, in the next day, from head office, just to provide some comments about this lunchbox, because that really helps us with the Victorian chapter in determining what we might do next. And for those, if anyone's not a member on this call, have a think about. I encourage you to become a member. ACRS is very much the peak road safety body across the Australasian, but also international. We've got an international group where, we bring researchers, practitioners, interested road safety advocates and community people together. So do consider that. And if you've got any questions or queries, email our Vic ACRS vic@acrs.gov.au email. .org.au. Thank you. I'm not used to it. But thank you so much for giving
Thanks,
up your
everyone.
lunchtime.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll
Thanks,
see you
Jack.
next time.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Bye.
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 Oh, bye.
Thank you, everyone.